Take a look at this. This is the Internet Computer chart. All-time high over $700 US. Current price just a fraction of that. Now ask yourself one question. Do you think the project is simply dead, or is there something in it that the market is completely ignoring right now? Most people would say, forget it. But that's exactly what they said about Ethereum back then, and that's precisely why it's worth taking a closer look today. Because whether Internet Computer deserves a second chance, or if the chapter is already closed again, that's what we're going to find out now. Hi, I'm Marius from 10x Invest, and today we're going to take a look at Internet Computer. What's really behind Internet Computer, and why is no one talking about it right now? And maybe that's exactly the reason why it's becoming interesting right now. So, just relax, grab yourself a coffee, leave a like for me, and then let's get started. But before we start, if you want to know which altcoins I have on my radar this week, then join the free 10x Insider. You'll find the link in the video description. No hype, no recommendations, just data-driven insights, and all completely free. Now let's talk about Internet Computer. This project has a history that reads like a textbook example of crypto risk assets. Extreme launch, extreme crash, years of silence, and yet Internet Computer is still active today, continues to be developed, and has an ecosystem that hardly anyone knows about. What exactly that means, and above all, whether it's still worth getting in today, you'll find out now. The example of what happened with Internet Computer. Let's start with what most people know, or at least think they know. Internet Computer was listed in May 2021. Price on the first day, over $700. Market capitalization temporarily among the top 10 worldwide. The hype was truly real, the promise was huge. A decentralized internet, smart contracts directly on the web level, without AWS, so without Google or central servers. And then, within weeks, the price collapsed massively. Within months, Internet Computer had disappeared from the headlines. Within 1 or 2 years, most investors had already written off the project again. What at first glance looks like a classic crypto story, meaning launch euphoria followed by oblivion, is actually a bit more complicated upon closer inspection. Because the question is not why did Internet Computer fall? But the truly crucial question is, what has changed since then? And the answer to that is more surprising than you might think right now. The why, what was really behind the crash? To understand whether Internet Computer is still relevant today, you have to understand why it was punished so brutally in 2021. First, the token launch was structurally problematic. Large allocations were held by insiders and early investors. Then, the vesting structures were set up in such a way that after the launch, there was significant selling pressure. That wasn't a technical failure, it was a trust issue. Second, the valuation was absurd. Over $700 for a token of a project that, at the time, could barely deliver anything beyond a white paper. That wasn't based on fundamentals, it was speculation in its purest form. Third, and this is crucial, the technology simply wasn't ready in 2021. Dfinity, the organization behind Internet Computer, made a promise back then that the product couldn't fulfill at that moment. The network existed, but the ecosystem was empty. Now comes the part that hardly anyone actually knows. In the last 2 years, something has happened that was completely drowned out by the noise of the market. The ecosystem has developed quietly but steadily. How much of that is actually substantial? We'll take a look at that now. The how. What Internet Computer is actually capable of today. Internet Computer pursues an approach that no other Layer 1 network implements so consistently. The goal to run software entirely on-chain. Not just smart contracts, not just tokens, but ultimately fully decentralized applications. Backend, data, everything directly on the Internet Computer network. That sounds technical at first, and it is. But the practical difference is the one I'm about to explain. With Ethereum or Solana, the code of the smart contract runs on-chain. But the user interface you see in your browser is usually hosted on centralized servers. If that server goes down or gets censored, then the app is gone. With Internet Computer, the concept is that everything is decentralized, even what you see in your browser. That's the technical core of the promise. But whether that actually scales in practice is a whole different question. What can be said, though, is that developer activity hasn't died down over the past 2 years. The ecosystem already has over 500 active projects today. There's an NFT marketplace ecosystem, DeFi protocols, decentralized social media approaches, and its own Bitcoin integration that allows you to manage Bitcoin directly on-chain without bridges. And this is where one of the most interesting arguments for internet computer lies, one that hardly anyone has on their radar. Because what a project can do and what it means for the token are two different things. The what? Tokenomics, market structure, CRV classification. Internet Computer has a tokenomics model that seems unusual at first glance. Tokens are not just traded, they can be staked in so-called neurons. Those who lock up Internet Computer in the governance system and participate in voting receive new tokens as a reward. This leads to a constant inflationary pressure. The maximum inflation rate, which is around 10%, decreases over time. That's not a small factor. If the market doesn't grow, inflation eats away at the price. At the same time, tokens are burned through transaction fees, the so-called burn mechanism. During periods of high network activity, this burn can partially offset inflation. Currently, the network has a market cap that, compared to other Layer 1 projects with similar developer activity, is rather low. That's not a buying argument, that's just a data point. And a single data point doesn't mean anything. But when you look at the whole picture, it becomes clear why Internet Computer, despite its history, is not yet completely irrelevant. And this is exactly the problem that I know from many viewers. You find a coin interesting, you see the technology, you roughly understand the narrative, but you don't know how to evaluate it or whether the current price even justifies the risk. I was at this point myself for a long time. I analyzed projects that sounded good, got in, and then realized that I had never really calculated the risk-reward ratio. At some point, I started evaluating every coin using the same criteria: on-chain data, market structure, tokenomics. Everything systematically, not just based on gut feeling. That changed everything. I share these complete analyses, including my watchlist and the evaluations, in my 10x Elite. You can find the link below in the video description or here with the QR code. Back to the question from the beginning. Is Internet Computer a project that has died or one that the market is simply ignoring right now? The honest answer is both are possible. The technology is unique in its consistency. The ecosystem is growing quietly but measurably, and its valuation is far below what comparable Layer 1 projects are demanding. But the risks are just as real. The token launch burned structural trust. Inflation is a constant headwind, even though Internet Computer has just released Mission 70. Adoption compared to Ethereum and Solana is still minimal, and the team still has to prove that they can not only make the promises of a decentralized internet technically possible, but also that it is actually usable. The risk-reward ratio for Internet Computer is asymmetric, meaning it can go in both directions. Anyone getting involved needs to be aware that this is a massive risk and a highly speculative bet on a narrative that the market has not rewarded so far. Whether that will change by 2026 or by 2030 is another story. Let's take a look at the whole thing on the chart now, with different price scenarios and where things currently stand. What would I do? Yeah, let's take a look at the whole thing directly in the chart as always. First, we'll take a rough overview again, just like I mentioned at the beginning of the video. As you can see, it was massive when it launched, and then there was a huge crash. Current situation, we had a big push here. By the way, the indicator formed a big green dot here, which means we were oversold at that point. Same here, by the way. Then we moved up here as well, but then a big red dot appeared, crash, another big red dot, another crash. That simply means we were in the overbought zone. At the moment, we formed a big green dot here, then moved up a bit as well because it was oversold. But right now we've moved up here. This is basically the central middle area, and a small red dot has formed. That suggests we could now see a bearish trend reversal. In plain English, I would be extremely cautious right now, especially with altcoins. We've also seen a massive increase in Bitcoin now. So my tactic here would be, purely from a technical analysis perspective, to wait for now. When I enter altcoins or Bitcoin, you can see that in my 10x Elite. And by the way, if you want to use the 10x indicator yourself for your chart analysis, you'll find all the information about it on my website in the video description. Now that you know everything about Internet Computer, I'll link you to another analysis here that's also extremely exciting and personally surprised me. Have fun and see you soon.